Hey, what's going on? My name is Rob. This is Film Streak. You know how it goes. I hope. If not, if you're new, thanks for checking this out. Thanks for listening. If you want to find other episodes, of course, go to filmstreak.com. You can find that. You can find a list of all the films we've talked about. This is number 400. 400 films I've watched in the last about 2 years since I've been doing this. And that's not even including others that I've already seen that I haven't really talked about in episodes yet. So we're actually over 400, but this one is the big number, I guess. I'll just say this much. I had a lot of expectations for Dune Part 2. The first film, I feel like, was so well done, so exceptional. The quality of it, the filmmaking, but also the performances and the writing, the cinematography, the music, everything. I feel like that was such a master work from a filmmaker who has really been on that track. Denis Villeneuve, he's been doing films like this. Even if you go back to his earlier films, something like Prisoners, something like Sicario, something like Enemy, which I talked about in a previous episode, those films all had hints of what's in this. When you get into other, like, heavier genre sci-fi stuff like Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, you can really see, like, okay, this guy is really doing something different. His goal, his aim is to do science fiction, but do it right and take it serious. And, I really thought with the first Dune film that, okay, he's onto something. He's got it here. And now seeing the second one, I just, this really has blown me away. And I think part of it is because there's nothing in the film that I feel like, there's nothing that betrays the idea that this is serious subject matter. We're going to treat this like something real that mankind is experiencing or will experience. I don't know. There's just, it's so seamless. The presentation, and look, speaking of which, see this in IMAX for sure. See this on the biggest screen you can. Watching this film, one, to see it on a huge screen, it's got the cinematography, it's got the filmmaking techniques to it that it requires you to really pay attention to subtle details and to be able to watch it on a, I don't know, what are they, 50, 80-foot screens? You can really isolate those details. The other thing is, of course, IMAX sound systems are no joke. And I have an Apple Watch. I don't know if you have an Apple Watch, but you can have it to where it alerts you if you're in an environment that is too loud. I think it's called like hearing protection alert or whatever it's called. And it just gives you a notification like, hey, your surroundings, your areas, it's not good for your hearing. This Apple Watch must have gone off like a dozen times in that movie. Seeing it in IMAX, you get the visual impact of it, but you also get that immersive sound that really puts you in that setting. Especially when the big action moments are happening. You got these set pieces, these explosions, and all these things. And when you feel your seat's rumbling and the floor is rumbling, with everything that you're seeing, it's undeniable. It's magic, really. It is a sort of magic, this filmmaking thing. And this film and the first film, I feel like are like all of these things just operating just on all cylinders, Everything just comes off perfectly. The other side of it, of course, is if the story itself doesn't really grab you, which I get, it's pretty dense. The book itself, of course, or the series of the books, but the film, even the first film does a lot of setup, explaining who's who and where we are and why we're here. This film, because that's out of the way, we kind of really get more into the action and we watch the story really push forward. But there's a big part of this film that it still relies on you buying into the idea, buying into the premise. And so, look, if you don't, science fiction is not your thing, fantasy is not your thing, I can understand, like, a lot of this stuff is probably not going to work for you. As much as people understand how great of a show Game of Thrones was, because it tackled that dense material so seriously and did it so well, there are a lot of people that have never seen that show and never have an interest in seeing that show, right? Same thing really applies here. And, you could even say, like, all the comic book superhero stuff, there's a lot of people that have no interest in it, even though those are some of the biggest movies in film history at this point. But this one, I think it's doing some things that really transcends those. And of course, you got to be able to sit with it and digest it and really see those themes and elements of the story that are beyond spaceships and other planets and all these weird cultures and civilizations, It is talking about things that are relevant, not only when the book came out in the 60s, but even today. There are actually some really relevant issues in the film that I feel like you could draw parallels to today's world. And so I think for the film to be able to show us that, and show us that in a really fresh and distinct way, that's not easy to do. I actually went back and watched the first version of Dune, let's say, the David Lynch film from, was it 1984, I think? And there are some things that, I remember when that came out, I remember seeing it maybe on cable or something, like in the mid-'80s. And I didn't really get it. I didn't really get, like, what this was. Was this some kind of like Star Wars knockoff or something like that? Like Buck Rogers, that kind of stuff. I just didn't understand it. I was too young to really grasp what was going on. A little later on, like I think it might have been like early high school years, whatever, I read the first book. But going back to watch the original film, it's clear now where so many corners were cut, like they had to take shortcuts. You can't condense that kind of material into 1, 2.5 hour film. And so seeing it done this way now with these films, I feel like this is really the version that we probably always should have gotten. And that's why I say kudos to Denis Villeneuve for trying this, for like being bold enough to take this swing. It's a big swing. It's a huge swing to make the first movie, not even sure if the second movie is going to come off, And to even make the second movie with the idea like, hey, maybe we'll get around to the third one. I'm going to work it up and we'll see how this goes. And maybe we'll get one more out of this. But, whether it's a generation of people who don't know the material, like don't know the original books, or they've seen other things that have either like copied it or imitated it or paid homage to it. As I was watching this film, more this film than in the first film, I guess, I started to really notice and mentally kind of make note that there are a lot of things in here that I feel like I've seen in one of my favorite films of all time, Lawrence of Arabia. Whether it's the setting, being in the desert, whether it's the idea of a man who's a foreigner kind of finding his way into a different culture and rising to power or using his influence, all those elements, I just remember thinking like, wait a minute, this book came out after Lawrence of Arabia. Because I think didn't Lawrence of Arabia come out in it was the early 60s, like 1962 or something. And if I remember right, I think a while back I had read that Frank Herbert I don't know if he was inspired necessarily, but I think he referred to some of T.E. Lawrence's real story and maybe the film itself in building the world and the story of Paul Atreides. And so that's where it's another thing. It's like, you think Dune is great. Well, it was actually based on something else that came before it. It's wild how that works, you know? And I wonder if that's part of what Dune, whether we're talking about the film here, but even the story in a larger sense, the book itself, it does comment, I think, on that sense of like generational breeding of, in the case of the story, the film, it's families or bloodlines or whatever, but breeding ideas and blending ideas. And sometimes those ideas can go sideways, but other times they can produce magic. And it's something that's why I feel like this film, it works on so many different levels. It works as just spectacle. You can just sit and watch it and listen to it and just be amazed. You can watch it as the story of these particular characters, or you can watch it in an even broader sense of commenting on the world at large, whether it is in the 60s or even today. Or you can even, like I said, zoom even further out and look at it on a existential level. This is not even just about nations and worlds and cultures, but it's about ideas. It's one of those, that's what I'm saying, man. This film has really hit me in a really deep place. And I don't know if that's by design with the film. I'm sure that's part of the idea with the story, with the original book. But the fact that the film also still, like it holds together, I think, in the film. But I gotta say, okay, so like getting a little heady there, getting a little out in the weeds, but this film in particular, I really liked a lot of the performances. Timothée Chalamet is already I think he's really doing some interesting work, not just in this series, let's say, but in other films he's been in. I'm glad to finally see Zendaya do something in this film. The first film, she wasn't really an important role, but now that Chani is a big part of this story and possibly, I don't know, going forward, the way this kind of sets some things up, I'm down for it. It's funny. I just watched a part of No Country for Old Men on TV last night, and I didn't even connect that Javier Bardem and Josh Brolin were in the same movie all those years ago. And here they are also in the same movie again. In the first one, yeah, they were technically in the film together, but they weren't in scenes together. This one, they are in scenes together. And I just thought that was a weird kind of flashback to a different film, a great film, but very different context, right? They're not enemies here. They're not hunting, playing cat and mouse with each other. They are allies in a sense. Also, I mean, Rebecca Ferguson, like all those actors, those roles, they're doing something different here, which I think in the first film, it kind of sets them up as they are the people we're supposed to pay attention to, whether they are the leaders or the mentors or the parental figures, I guess. And in this one, they all kind of take a back seat. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, I think that's the idea with the roles that they play. But to see these younger actors, these new characters, especially even, look, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, those characters, they're pretty crucial to the plot. I mean, you can't like just throw somebody in there. It's got to be somebody who can handle this kind of role. I mean, like even Florence Pugh, the princess, I mean, in the first film was non-existent, but in the books is really kind of an important element throughout the story. So here to be able to really get a sense of that now in the second film, it's like this is how important she actually is to everything. I like that addition. Austin Butler, on the other hand, he's doing some next level stuff, man. He's like taking this beyond. Where that guy is going with the characters he's playing, I feel like he's good. He's going to be set, Get your stock, put your orders in. And the thing I've seen, like just have seen videos here and there, interviews and so on, is like those four actors, like Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, I feel like that really is a new crew that's coming up. It's like a new wave. And they're not the only ones. but they are of that generation now that I think it's funny. They just all kind of happen to coalesce or co-star in this film together. But I think they really do represent that wave of new young actors that are not just good actors, but also they've got movie star quality to them, you know? And, you know, you could say it's a little bit of like handing the torch, you know, with the older cast that's in it. But that's the thing, is like everybody's doing solid work. Nobody here is a slouch. Even Stellan Skarsgård, who, I mean, the Baron, that role is so, I guess I want to say unforgiving. Not just the character himself, but like the portrayal of it. Like the amount of work it must take to get that set up. Makeup and whatever, you know, they have him, however they have him floating and moving. Like, that's next level, man. And I think it all amounts to so much distinct work to tell this story. So I went to go see this film with my son and my dad, who maybe you've heard on a previous episode. If you haven't, go check it out. Talking to my son about the film and kind of the background, my history with it, I remember watching the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, and that goes into the whole story of, I think it was like in the early 70s, that he was trying to get this film made. He was developing it. And one of the things I remember was, I think it was supposedly going to be like a 15-hour film. But Jodorowsky's vision, his sensibility is so avant-garde, so kind of off the wall. I don't know how that could have even possibly come off. I mean, not only being way too long, I mean, it would have to be a series of films. Like we're talking like Harry Potter or something. But then also 15 hours of his style of filmmaking. I don't know if audiences would even understand that. And if you've ever seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, find it and watch it, because it's not such an exercise in seeing Dune necessarily, but it is an exercise in understanding the creative process, especially when it comes to filmmaking. I mean, there's so much in there that is, it's a lot of inside baseball, but it is about how ideas come together and how sometimes it's a struggle, and sometimes you just have to shoot for it, you know? It's a big swing, but it's like, this is what I want to do, and this is what will tell this story. And when you see all of the artwork, you see all of the ideas that they planned to do in the film. You know, there's the famous book, the book that was produced with all the drawings and the notes and everything. That is such that's an interesting way to look at making a film, is to basically do the entire film before you do the film, right? And it's not to say people who make films don't spend time preparing to make a film. But still, to see it as a giant book, it's staggering, you know, but it's fascinating to me. Like, to think this is the kind of dedication you have to have. This is the kind of strength and belief in your ideas that you have to create something like Dune. And I'm sure Denis Villeneuve did a similar thing, maybe in his own way. But I think something like this, the way the films have turned out, it wouldn't surprise me. They're so visually rich and layered and detailed that you have to imagine this took maybe years or maybe a lifetime of developing to get it made. So all of this is just to say, like, this one book with the ideas in it, with the characters and the story of it, to be able to bring it to the big screen and do it in such a magnificent way, I'm in awe of it. I mean, I think one of the few times that I can say I've felt the same is seeing the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know, those first three. The Hobbit, I appreciated the attempt, but the Lord of the Rings, that first trilogy, was the early 2000s, that was another one where those films, those books, put it that way, they really were, I think, considered like unfilmable. Like, you can't, there's no way to make this into a film. And of course, they had to leave a lot of things out. They had to compress and combine some things for the sake of telling it on screen. But I still think they hold up. They are, on their own, they are master works. Maybe you could say that about other books that have been turned into films too. I don't know. The Harry Potter deals, I don't know. I like a few of the films, but I don't know how close they are to the books. I don't know if they really capture the same tone as the books. I'm sure there are others, but to think that this really takes the material to a different level and to be, look, that's the other thing, not just to do it and do it well, but to be successful, right? Like to be critically acclaimed, to be a hit at the box office. Man, it's like how many things have to line up for that to happen? And I mean, if you even want to talk about sequels, I could count on one hand the amount of sequels that I think the second film is better than the original. And I mean, maybe that's like The Godfather 2. I think they're both great films. They're both top 10 for me. But I think The Godfather 2, because it's just bigger, it's got other locations, other characters, other time periods. I mean, right? The whole jumping back and forth in time, far more ambitious. And to me, that edges out the first film. You talk about something like maybe Terminator 2, right? Where it's kind of treading on the same ground as the original film a little bit, but it's so much more refined and polished and honestly even evolves the idea of the first film to kind of flip things on its head and make your bad guy the good guy and then introduce a new bad guy that seems impossible to defeat, right? It's like also, and plus look, introducing CG and all that stuff, also super ambitious. For a long time, I thought Aliens was a better sequel than Alien, but over the years, I've kind of come back around to, no, I think Alien was the better film. Really from a cinematic standpoint. From an entertainment perspective, I mean, yeah, I probably have more fun watching Aliens, but Alien is really the one that set the tone. And, I don't know, I'm trying to think even more like what other sequels are better than the original. Those come to mind, and this one, I feel like it's actually in that same camp. It's like this, as good as the first film was, I felt like this one is more entertaining and speaking to more of the bigger themes of the book itself, I think. And I could even see where maybe it gets a little bit on the nose with, hey, we're trying to point you to feel a certain way versus kind of letting it play out and let me come to the conclusion. I kind of felt that a little bit, but still, I just think it's still quality. We're talking about the highest quality of filmmaking here. So going forward, I feel like I want to see what is this next film. If they do Dune Messiah, what is that going to look like? I've never read the book, so I don't have any familiarity with it. I from what I know, I think it's some years after, but the idea being that we could get to see this after some time. And of course, the cast being maybe some of the characters are the same, maybe some new characters. I think it's a way to just expand this even more and talk about ambitious swings, On the other hand, it's like I would like to see Denis Villeneuve do something new now. Because I was telling somebody the other day, it's like he's never done a sequel. I mean, maybe, there was a sequel to Sicario, but he didn't direct that. So I feel like let's keep that going. Like, let's keep moving to new things, to original works, or at least other projects, other adaptations even. Because his sensibility, his eye, I think it's really, there's very few filmmakers out there right now that can do that have that ability to look at scale, to look at scope, but also to zero in on a character or even an emotion, to hit all of those beats in the same film, sometimes at the same time. It's wild. So, yeah, I mean, look, I didn't necessarily mean for it to be a love letter, but it is like I'm totally in admiration of this film, the way it's come out. I can't wait to see it again. I can't wait to see them all in a row or as a whole. So all I can say is I recommend it. If you have a chance to see it while it's in the theaters, for sure do it. And for sure do it on the biggest screen you can find. So that's it for me. I think I've talked enough about this film. I might have some more things to say later as I kind of really sit with it a little bit. But if you want to hear some other episodes, you want to hear me talk about other new films, this one is new. Others are much older. You go to filmstreak.com. You can find other episodes. You can subscribe with all the podcast places, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's on YouTube now. Google did some things. So now this podcast, you can catch it on YouTube. I guess you can just subscribe there. There's no video. I don't do these as video. I started doing them as video. Might do them again as video one day. But for now, it's still audio. And don't forget, that I have the list. IMDb, I have a list on there. It's got all 400 films now. We'll just keep adding to it with every episode. Go check that out. You could add them to your list, get in this same, paint yourself in the same corner that I'm in with too many films to watch. But it's all good, man. That's all we're here to do is just enjoy new work, right? So anyway, next episode, I feel like it's going to be fun. I'm going to try and see what we can do at the Houston Latino Film Festival. So if you're hearing this and it's still early March 2024, come check out the festival. It's at the end of the month and there's single screenings. You can get a pass like for all access. We're going to do some fun stuff there. I'll be there with the crew. We're going to hang out and we'll record some things. So until next time, hey, just take it easy, have fun, go watch something new.